make the choice once again to extend the Brexit process as a decision they've now already made twice before?
Jennifer Rankin, The Guardian's correspondent in Brussels, thank you. Now, judges at Scotland's highest court have delayed a decision on whether the Prime Minister has fully complied with the law requiring him to ask for a Brexit extension. Boris Johnson, as we know, sent that unsigned letter to Brussels asking for a delay, along with a signed letter saying he believed that doing so would be a mistake. Well, the UK government maintains it has fulfilled its legal obligations. Well, Stephen Godden went along to the hearing at the Court of Session in Edinburgh. So, Stephen, what were campaigners saying in court?
Well, Vary, the question that they want the court to answer, as you say, is whether the Prime Minister has fully complied with the law, the so-called Ben Act that was designed to ensure that a no-deal Brexit couldn't happen. But while they want that question answered, they didn't want it answered today. You'll perhaps remember that when this case was last heard, the judges adjourned it to give more time, essentially for events to play out, to see what happens. And today the argument from the petitioners, who include the SNP politician Joanna Cherry and the lawyer Joe Mom, they were arguing for more of the same, more time for events to play out and see what happens. What has changed, of course, as you've just been discussing since the last hearing, were the events of the weekend, that parliamentary defeat for Boris Johnson that prompted him to start this intense period of letter writing. The first letter, unsigned photocopy asking the EU for an extension to the Brexit process, and then this second letter, signed this time and addressed to the head of the EU Council, Donald Tusk, expressing regret for the way things had panned out in Parliament on Saturday, and repeating Boris Johnson's view that a further extension would damage the interests of the UK and the EU. That one, just to quote from the letter. These letters, of course, were central to what was said in court today. Aidan O'Neill, the petitioner's QC, acknowledged that in sending that first letter, Boris Johnson had met his legal obligation as far as the Ben Act was concerned. What was less clear, he said, was that whether the Prime Minister's overall approach is an attempt to frustrate the legislation, this policy of sending two letters, and he urged the court to take more time to consider that. Here's what Aidan O'Neill had to say.
It seems to me that, and as I say, this is wholly a matter for the court, that the signed letter which was sent by the Prime Minister to Donald Tusk, in certain of its phrasings, does rather seem to me, at least, to be not entirely in accord with the spirit of that undertaking, and that there does seem to be, at the very least, a very close sailing to the wind.
So how did the lawyers for the UK government respond?
Well, they rejected the arguments being put forward by the petitioners and said it was quite simple, that the Prime Minister had sent that letter to the EU requesting an extension, and as such he had complied with his legal obligation. That meant that the UK government QC, David Johnson, argued that meant that the case should go no further as far as the court was concerned. At that point, the judges then took a short break, an adjournment, to consider the arguments that had been put forward to them. They came back in about 15-20 minutes or so later, and led by Lord Carloway, they gave their opinion, which was that the case would continue. Again, until it's clear that the obligations laid down by the Ben Act have been fully complied with, and just a chance to let things play out a little bit further.
So what happens next then?
Well, as far as what happened in court today was concerned, it was welcomed by the petitioners. Joanna Cherry said that the court's decision meant that, in her words, the sword of Damocles was still hanging over the Prime Minister. I think for everyone concerned, it's now a case of wait and see, as you were discussing with your previous contributor. How will the EU respond to those letters that have been sent? What does the Prime Minister do? And of course, crucially, what happens as far as a vote in the House of Commons on the deal is concerned? These are all crucial factors for when the court meets again to consider the case, and will very much shape the arguments when it does. When it does, we don't know when that will be yet. There is no date being set, but for fairly obvious reasons it will be at some point in the next 2 weeks.
Stephen Godden, thank you.
News Drive on BBC Radio Scotland.
The headlines, and as we've been hearing, the Commons Speaker has refused a request from the UK government to hold a vote on its Brexit deal today. The Court of Session in Edinburgh has delayed a decision on whether the Prime Minister has fully complied with a law requiring him to ask for a Brexit extension. And research suggests former professional footballers are 3.5 times more likely to die from dementia than the general population. Victoria has the latest on the roads now.
And strong winds will slow you down on the A9 Dornoch Bridge. It's open to all traffic, but take care. In Aberdeen, there are delays on the A978 St Macher Drive between Great Northern Road and King Street, with a journey time there of around 5 minutes. In West Lothian, queues on the M8 westbound at Junction 4 Whitburn. Roadworks and a lane closure mean a journey time here of around 20 minutes. In Edinburgh, one lane of the A720 City Bypass still blocked by a breakdown westbound at the Sheriff Hall roundabout. Also in Edinburgh, eastbound delays on the M8 at Junction 1 Hermiston Gate. Slower than usual there, and clearing that junction will take around 15 minutes just now. Heading out of Edinburgh towards the Queensferry crossing, the M19 northbound slow too. And in Falkirk, the M9 has heavy traffic northbound between Junction 5 Cadgers Brae and 7 Kinnaird House. 08000 92 95 88. BBC Radio Scotland Travel.
E.D. Stark talks to fashion designer Nicholas Daly about his heritage.
I am a 6'4" black guy with dreadlocks, but my parents have made me so aware of both my Jamaican heritage and my Scottish heritage that I know exactly where my roots are from.
His parents running reggae clubs in Scotland.
What they did was really life enhancing.
That's the reason why I was like, wow, I really have to shine a light on what my parents did.
And his recent Sligo fashion collection.
Sligo's that your dad's DJ name?
I'm on Sligo Sound System. It's nice to play homage to the alias which he went by.
The new series of Stark Talk begins Wednesday at 1:30 on BBC Radio Scotland.
Now, archaeology experts have seemingly solved the case of how human remains were found at a house in Aberdeen. The discovery was made by workers renovating the property in Canal Street last November. Well, staff from Aberdeenshire Council and Aberdeen University were drafted in after police ruled out foul play. Well, using records stretching back 200 years, they found a medical student was the likely cause. Let's speak now to Dr. Rebecca Crozier, a lecturer in archaeology at Aberdeen University. So, good evening. What did you find out?
Well, when we originally were given the bones, I was given quite a small box, not what we'd normally expect. We like to get whole skeletons to work with, and we were sent a lot of fragments, to be honest, very broken up and mixed, and we pulled them all apart and had a little look, and I was able to figure out that we were mostly looking at pieces of cranium, so the skull, and when we had a closer look, they have marks on them that indicate they had had some kind of surgical intervention, which would not be entirely what we were expecting to see. It's quite interesting.
And so how would you actually rule out foul play in that then?
Well, the marks that we're looking at are consistent with they're known surgical procedures, things that we would associate with things like autopsy or medical dissection, as it turns out. So nothing that would indicate anything untoward had happened. And also the time depths that we're looking at as well would tell us there's something much older.
And were they all from the same person or different?
So when we had a look at them, we were able to figure out that we have actually at least 5 different individuals. So I had 5 different sets of skulls, if you like, or bits of skulls. So I know I don't have just one person. And 2 of the people had this evidence for surgery. So one had what we call a craniotomy. And that can happen as part of an autopsy, and it also happens if you are dissected for medical teaching. And we also had a child skull, and when we looked at it, had a very unusual mark on the front, right between the eyes, on the forehead. Looked a bit like a donut, and it actually